Erica had never known what a warm home felt like until the day she stepped into Obasi and Michelle's house. Before that, her life had been one of endless struggles, moving from one foster home to another where she was either neglected or outright mistreated. But Obasi had smiled at her, placed a protective hand on her shoulder, and said, "You are safe here. This is your home now." Michelle had knelt in front of her, offering a steaming plate of jollof rice. "Eat, my dear, you must be hungry." Erica had hesitated at first, her stomach twisting in knots. Nobody had ever cared for her before, but as the aroma of the rice filled her nose and the warmth of their kindness surrounded her, she burst into tears and took her first bite. The first few years were blissful. Obasi took her to school and bought her little gifts, treating her as his own daughter. Michelle taught her how to cook, braid hair, and sew. Erica finally felt like she belonged. The word daddy slipped from her lips one day without thinking, and when Obasi laughed and hugged her tightly, she knew she had found a real home. But happiness had a way of slipping through one's fingers. 3 years later, everything changed. The birth that changed everything. Michelle became pregnant. Erica had been excited at first. A baby, a little brother or sister to love. She watched in fascination as Michelle's belly grew, felt the baby kick under her palm, and listened as Obasi spoke of names. "If it's a boy, we'll name him Emmanuel," he said. "And if it's a girl?" Erica asked eagerly. Obasi and Michelle exchanged glances before Michelle finally said, "Sharon or Kiara." One evening, as Erica played outside, a sharp scream cut through the air. She ran inside to find Michelle writhing in pain, and within moments, Obasi had rushed her to the hospital. Erica sat alone, trembling, waiting for hours until Obasi finally returned, his face shining with joy. "It's two girls, twins," he announced. Erica clapped excitedly, but something about his expression made her pause. There was happiness in his eyes, but also something else, something she couldn't quite place. In the days that followed, Erica began to feel the shift in the household. Michelle became too busy with the twins, and Obasi, once so present in her life, was always at work. The house that had once felt warm now felt different. One night, Erica knocked on Michelle's door. "Mommy, can you help me with my homework?" Michelle, holding Sharon in one arm and rocking Kiara with the other, sighed. "Not now, Erica, go read by yourself." It was the first time Michelle had ever turned her away. Obasi's tragic death. Then came the first real wound to Erica's heart. One afternoon, Obasi came home with bags of gifts. Erica's heart soared. Maybe he had brought something for her, but as he unpacked the bags, she realized that all the toys and clothes were for the twins. "Daddy, did you bring anything for me?" she asked hesitantly. Obasi froze for a moment, then patted her head. "Next time, my dear, next time." She swallowed the lump in her throat and forced a smile. But deep inside, a voice whispered, "Your place in this house is changing." Then came the day that shattered everything. That morning, Obasi had kissed Michelle goodbye and playfully patted Erica's head before leaving for work. That afternoon, there was a knock at the door. 2 policemen stood there, their faces grim. "Madam, there has been an accident. Your husband, he didn't make it." Michelle let out a scream so piercing that Erica's heart nearly stopped. She ran to her adoptive mother, clutching her trembling hands. "Mommy, what happened? Where is Daddy?" Michelle turned on her with wild eyes, shaking her. "He's gone, Erica, gone." Erica stood frozen, unable to breathe. Obasi was gone, just like that. The man who had given her a home, a family, was gone. And from that moment, her world began to crumble. The cold truth. Years passed. Erica, Sharon, and Kiara grew up together, but the bond they once shared had disappeared. One evening, while searching for old documents, Sharon and Kiara found something unexpected, an adoption paper with Erica's name on it. "What is this?" Sharon whispered, holding up the paper. Kiara snatched it, her eyes wide. "She's not our real sister." That night at dinner, Sharon slammed the paper onto the table in front of Michelle. "Explain this, mother." Michelle's hands shook as she picked it up. "Where did you find this?" "So it's true," Kiara snapped. "She's not our blood." Michelle sighed. "Erica was adopted before you were born. Your father loved her like his own." Erica felt her heart pound in her chest. She had always felt different, but hearing the truth confirmed hurt more than she ever imagined. And from that day forward, Sharon and Kiara changed. "You're not one of us," Sharon snapped one morning. "Stop pretending." Kiara laughed. "No wonder Daddy liked you more, you were just a charity case." Even Michelle became distant. The woman who had once loved her as a daughter now treated her like an outsider. Then one evening, Michelle looked her straight in the eyes and said, "Erica, maybe it's time you start thinking about moving out." Erica's breath hitched. "Move out, Mommy, why?" Michelle looked away. "You are grown now, you should find your own way." And just like that, the house that had once been her home became a place of unbearable pain. Erica stood outside the house she had once called home, her belongings stuffed into a small, tattered bag. The weight of Michelle's words pressed down on her chest like a boulder. "You should find your own way." She had heard those words before long ago, when she was just a child bouncing from one foster home to another. But she had never expected to hear them again, from the woman who had once promised her a forever family. The door slammed shut behind her, and with it, the last remnants of warmth she had once felt within those walls. She had nowhere to go. The streets were cold and unwelcoming. The sky above was dark with the promise of rain, and Erica shivered as she pulled her thin shawl tighter around her shoulders. She had spent the entire day wandering, her stomach twisting with hunger, her feet aching from endless walking. She could not go to her school friends, none of them had ever been close enough to offer shelter. And returning to the house would be useless. Michelle had made it clear, she was no longer welcome. As the first raindrops began to fall, Erica curled up beneath the awning of a closed shop. Tears stung her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. Crying wouldn't help her now. She needed a plan. She needed a way to survive. The next morning, she went in search of work. She walked from shop to shop, knocking on doors, asking if anyone needed help. But each time she was met with the same response: shaking heads, pitiful looks, dismissive gestures. Nobody wanted to hire a girl with no experience, no home, and no family to vouch for her. By evening, hunger gnawed at her insides like a wild animal. She had not eaten since the night before. As she passed by a bustling restaurant, the scent of roasted plantains and grilled meat made her stomach cramp painfully. She stood outside for a long time, watching as people laughed and ate, completely oblivious to her suffering. Then out of nowhere, a voice spoke behind her. "You look hungry." Erica turned to find an old woman staring at her, her face lined with age, her eyes filled with something between pity and curiosity. The woman held out a small bundle wrapped in banana leaves. "Take it." Erica hesitated, but her hunger won over her pride. "Thank you," she whispered, accepting the food. She unwrapped it to find a portion of rice and beans, still warm. She ate in silence, the woman watching her closely. "What's your name, child?" the woman asked. "Erica." "And where is your family?" Erica lowered her gaze. "I don't have one." The woman nodded knowingly. "Then you must be careful. A girl alone in this world is easy prey." The warning sent a chill through Erica's spine, but before she could respond, the woman turned and walked away, disappearing into the crowd. That night, as she curled up on the cold ground again, she thought about the woman's words. Easy prey. She had heard stories of young girls who vanished from the streets, never to be seen again. She had to find a way out of this life, fast. The next day, just as Erica was losing hope, Michelle appeared. At first, Erica thought she was imagining things. Michelle stood on the street corner, her expensive handbag slung over her shoulder, her face calm and unreadable. When Erica met her gaze, she hesitated before walking closer. "What do you want?" Erica asked, her voice laced with bitterness. Michelle sighed. "I have a proposal for you." Erica frowned. "A proposal?" Michelle glanced around as if ensuring no one was listening, then lowered her voice. "There's a man willing to marry you." Erica's stomach twisted. "Mary, I don't even have a home and you're talking about marriage." "This is your only chance," Michelle said coldly. "The man is humble, hardworking, he will provide for you." Erica stared at her in disbelief. "You threw me out like garbage and now you want to sell me off." Michelle's expression remained impassive. "You have no other options." And that was the painful truth. Erica knew she couldn't survive on the streets much longer. The next evening she met him. His name was Kofi. He was tall, lean, with deep brown skin and intelligent eyes. His clothes were simple, a faded tunic and worn sandals. He had the look of a man who had struggled all his life but refused to let it break him. Michelle introduced them briefly, then left, leaving them to talk alone. Kofi studied her in silence before finally saying, I know this is not what you want. Erica crossed her arms. You don't know anything about me. Kofi chuckled, but there was no amusement in it. I know what it means to be abandoned. His words made her pause. I won't hurt you, he continued. I just need a wife and you need a home. Erica looked away. Everything about this felt wrong. But what choice did she have? She was tired of being hungry, tired of being alone. So with a heavy heart she agreed. The wedding was small, rushed, and emotionless. There was no celebration, no joy, just an exchange of vows before a local elder, followed by the signing of papers that bound them together. Michelle and her daughters did not even attend. They had gotten what they wanted to get rid of her. Kofi took her to his home, a tiny one-room house in a quiet part of the village. It was nothing like the life she had once known. There were no luxuries, no servants, no soft beds or silk curtains, just a simple cot, a wooden table, and a small cooking pot in the corner. This is home, Kofi said, watching her carefully. Erica nodded stiffly. Days passed and she struggled to adjust. She had never done real housework before, but now it was expected of her. She washed clothes, cooked meals, and cleaned. The work was exhausting, and at night she collapsed onto the small bed they shared, too tired to speak. Kofi, for his part, was kind. He never raised his voice, never forced her into anything. He gave her space, letting her adjust at her own pace, but she couldn't help but resent him. She didn't love him. And worse, she knew Michelle, Sharon, and Kiara were laughing at her. They had married her off to a poor man while they continued living in luxury. One afternoon, she visited the marketplace to buy food. As she walked through the stalls, she heard familiar laughter. She turned to see Sharon and Kiara dressed in fine clothes, surrounded by their rich friends. When they spotted her, their smiles widened. Erica, Sharon called out mockingly, "How's the married life?" Kiara smirked, "I heard your husband is struggling, such a shame." Erica clenched her fists, her face burning with humiliation. She wanted to lash out, to tell them she was fine, that she was happy, but she couldn't, because the truth was she was. As she walked away, their laughter echoed behind her, a cruel reminder of how far she had fallen. That night, as she sat in the small house watching Kofi work on something in the dim light, she whispered, "Do you ever regret this?" Kofi looked up. "Regret what?" "This marriage." He studied her for a moment before answering, "No." Erica frowned. "Why not?" Kofi smiled slightly, "Because sometimes things are not as they seem." She didn't understand what he meant, not then, but soon she would. Because Kofi had a secret that would change everything. Days turned into weeks, and Erica's life with Kofi settled into a monotonous rhythm. Each morning, she rose before the sun, swept the tiny house, prepared a simple meal, and washed their clothes. The work was tiring, but she did it without complaint. Kofi, as always, remained quiet and reserved. He spent his days working in the fields and his nights carving small wooden sculptures by the dim candlelight. There was a patience in him that confused her. He never demanded anything from her, never forced her into conversations she didn't want to have. Yet despite his kindness, she could not shake the resentment in her heart. This was not the life she had imagined for herself. She was meant for silk dresses and soft cushions, not rough hands and simple meals. One evening, as she prepared supper, she turned to Kofi suddenly. "Why did you agree to marry me?" Kofi looked up from his carving. "Because you needed me." She scoffed. "I didn't need anyone." He smiled slightly, but his eyes held something unreadable. "Then why did you say yes?" Erica fell silent. She had no answer for him. That night she lay awake, staring at the thatched ceiling, wondering if she had made a mistake. The next day, she decided to take a walk through the village. She had not explored much since the wedding, and she longed for an escape, even if just for a few hours. As she wandered through the dusty roads, she heard whispers. "She's the one who married him. Poor girl doesn't know the truth. She should leave while she can." Erica's heart pounded. What truth? She quickened her steps, determined to ignore them. But as she passed an elderly woman selling fruit, the woman called out, "Girl, wait." Erica hesitated. The old woman leaned in and whispered, "Be careful of your husband. He is not what he seems." Erica frowned. "What do you mean?" But the woman simply shook her head and turned away. That night, Erica watched Kofi more closely. Was there something she had missed? He seemed the same as always, calm, patient, quiet, but the whispers haunted her. As Kofi slept, she carefully searched the small house. She didn't know what she was looking for until she found it. A locked wooden chest hidden beneath their bed. Her fingers trembled as she traced the edges. What was he hiding? And then she heard his voice behind her. "You shouldn't be looking there, Erica." She froze. Slowly, she turned to see Kofi standing in the doorway, his face unreadable. For the first time since their marriage, she felt real fear. Erica's breath hitched as she looked up at Kofi. His silhouette in the doorway was unnerving, calm yet imposing. The candlelight flickered, casting shadows across his face, making it harder to read his expression. I wasn't doing anything," she stammered, quickly stepping away from the wooden chest. Kofi took a slow step forward, his eyes never leaving hers. "Then why are you trembling?" She clenched her fists, forcing herself to stand tall. "Because I don't know who I married," she snapped. "The villagers whisper about you, they say you're hiding something." She gestured to the chest. "What's in there?" Kofi remained silent for a long moment. Then, without a word, he crouched down and pulled a key from the leather cord around his neck. The lock clicked open. Erica held her breath as he lifted the lid. Inside were neatly arranged pieces of parchment, faded with age. On top of them lay a small, ornate dagger with a golden hilt, its blade gleaming even in the dim light. Kofi picked up one of the papers and handed it to her. "Read." Erica hesitated before unfolding it. Her eyes scanned the words and her stomach twisted. It was a letter, a contract. Her father's signature was at the bottom. Her hands trembled as she read the details, an agreement between her father and Kofi's family, made long before she was even born. This says my father was in debt," she whispered, barely believing it. Kofi nodded. "A great debt, one he could not repay." She shook her head. "That doesn't explain why you married me." Kofi sighed, running a hand over his face. "Your father came to my family, desperate for help. My grandfather agreed to save his business, but in return, your father promised his firstborn daughter would marry into our family." He looked at her. "That daughter was you, Erica." She stumbled back as if she had been struck. "That's impossible, my father would never." "You didn't know him as well as you thought." Anger and disbelief surged inside her. She had spent her whole life believing she was in control of her destiny, but all along, her fate had been sealed before she was even born. Tears burned at her eyes. "So what am I then, a payment, a debt repaid?" Kofi's expression softened. "No, Erica, that's not how I see you." She glared at him. "Then how do you see me?" He hesitated. "As my wife." She let out a bitter laugh, a wife who had no choice. Silence stretched between them. Finally, Kofi spoke. "You have a choice now." Erica looked at him in confusion. "If you want to leave, I won't stop you," he said. "I never wanted to trap you, Erica. I only honored my family's promise." Erica's heart pounded. She had wanted freedom from the moment she arrived in this village, and now Kofi was giving it to her. But for some reason, the thought of walking away didn't feel as simple as it once had. Her entire life had been built on lies, but if she left now, where would she go? She stared at Kofi, searching for answers in his dark eyes. For the first time since their marriage, she wasn't sure if she wanted to know them. Erica sat in the dimly lit room, the old parchment trembling in her hands. The truth unraveled before her like a cruel joke, a contract, a transaction, a promise made long before she ever had a say in her own fate. Kofi stood silently, watching her, his face unreadable. She could hear the steady beat of her own heart loud in the silence. "I should hate you," she murmured, her voice hoarse. Kofi's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. "My father, he sold me like property," she continued, staring at the contract. "And you married me knowing I was nothing more than a repayment." His eyes darkened with something she couldn't quite name. "I never saw you that way, Erica." She let out a bitter laugh. "Then how did you see me?" Kofi sighed and ran a hand over his face. "At first I saw you as duty, an agreement I had to honor, but then I saw you, the woman who fights against every chain placed on her, the woman who challenges and questions instead of obeying blindly." He took a cautious step toward her. And now I see you as someone I don't want to lose. Her breath hitched. She had expected many things from Kofi. Indifference, control, even cruelty, but never this. Not honesty. Not vulnerability. She looked away, her mind racing. Could she trust him? Could she trust herself? Then why didn't you just tell me the truth from the beginning? She asked. Because I was afraid. Erica blinked in surprise. Kofi exhaled deeply. Afraid that if you knew, you would never give us a chance. He swallowed. Afraid that the moment you could leave, you would. Silence stretched between them. And then finally, Erica asked the question she had been too afraid to face. What happens now? Kofi's gaze searched hers. That's your choice, Erica. Her chest tightened. You mean you'd actually let me go? He nodded. If that's what you truly want. The words should have felt like freedom. Instead, they felt like a heavy weight pressing against her chest. She had spent weeks longing for a way out, dreaming of the day she could leave and return to the life she had before. But as she stared at Kofi, she realized something unsettling. She wasn't the same woman who had arrived in this village. The girl who had once defined freedom as running away now found herself wondering if freedom could mean something else. Like staying. Like choosing to stay. She closed her eyes for a long moment, inhaling deeply. Then, when she opened them, she met Kofi's gaze and spoke the words that would decide her fate. I want to stay. Kofi's breath caught, but he didn't move. Are you sure? She nodded, but on my terms. A slow, cautious smile tugged at the corner of his lips. What are your terms? Erica squared her shoulders. No more secrets, no more decisions made for me. If we do this, we do it as equals. Kofi took another step closer, his voice low. Then we do it as equals. For the first time, Erica felt like she had control over her own destiny. Not because of some contract. Not because of obligation. But because she chose it. And for the first time since she had arrived in this village, she no longer felt trapped. She felt free.